Sarah Martinez stepped through the heavy glass doors of Thunder Ridge shooting range, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished concrete floor. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air like an invisible fog, mixing with the metallic tang of spent brass casings. She clutched a small canvas bag close to her chest, her knuckles white against the faded material. The receptionist barely glanced up from her magazine, chewing gum with mechanical precision. Behind the counter, 3 men in tactical gear discussed their weekend plans, their voices carrying the easy confidence of regular customers. Sarah approached the desk hesitantly, clearing her throat twice before anyone acknowledged her presence. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. Her name tag read Jessica in bold letters, but her expression offered no warmth to match the friendly font. Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'd like to rent a lane, please, and maybe, could I try a few different firearms?" She fumbled with her purse, producing a crumpled $20 bill and some loose change. Jessica's eyes swept over Sarah's appearance with barely concealed amusement. The older woman wore a simple floral blouse that had seen better days, paired with dark slacks that seemed too large for her slight frame. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat but unremarkable ponytail, and she carried herself with the quiet demeanor of someone accustomed to blending into backgrounds. "First time?" Jessica asked, already reaching for the basic safety waiver forms. The question wasn't really a question at all, more like a statement wrapped in feigned politeness. One of the tactical gear enthusiasts turned around, his attention drawn by the interaction. Mike Thompson had been coming to Thunder Ridge for 3 years, and he prided himself on knowing every serious shooter in the area. This woman definitely wasn't one of them. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place?" Mike asked, his tone carrying what he probably thought was helpful concern. "There's a nice little craft store just down the street. They do pottery classes on Thursdays." His companions chuckled, not maliciously, but with the casual dismissiveness that comes from assumptions. To them, Sarah represented everything that didn't belong in their world of precision shooting and tactical discussions. She was too quiet, too unassuming, too ordinary. Sarah's cheeks flushed pink, but she maintained her composure. "I'm quite sure this is where I need to be," she replied, her voice gaining a hint of steel that went unnoticed by everyone except the elderly range officer, who had been quietly observing from behind a rack of ear protection. Frank Rodriguez had worked at shooting ranges for 42 years, and he'd learned to read people in ways that went far beyond appearances. Something about the woman's stance, the way she held herself despite the obvious discomfort of the situation, caught his attention. There was a stillness about her that reminded him of the best marksman he'd ever known. Jessica completed the paperwork with theatrical efficiency, explaining the basic safety rules in a sing-song voice that suggested she'd delivered the same speech thousands of times. Sarah listened intently, asking no questions but absorbing every word with the focus of someone who understood that details mattered. "We'll start you with something simple," Jessica announced, leading Sarah toward the firearms counter. "Maybe a .22 caliber, very manageable for beginners, low recoil, minimal noise." She spoke as if addressing a child, her words carefully enunciated. The display case gleamed under fluorescent lights, filled with an impressive array of handguns, rifles, and accessories. Sarah's eyes moved across the options methodically, pausing on certain models with an interest that seemed oddly specific for someone who had supposedly never held a firearm. Mike and his friends had positioned themselves at lanes near the entrance, their conversation punctuated by the sharp crack of gunfire from other shooters. They glanced occasionally toward Sarah, sharing meaningful looks and barely suppressed grins. $10 says she can't hit the target at all," whispered Jake, Mike's regular shooting partner. He was already envisioning the story he'd tell his wife later about the sweet old lady who thought she could learn to shoot. Frank handed Sarah a pair of safety glasses and ear protection, taking a moment longer than necessary to meet her eyes. "Take your time out there," he said quietly. "The range doesn't care how fast you learn, only that you learn safely." There was something in his tone that felt different from the others, and Sarah nodded gratefully. She understood that he was offering her something the others hadn't. Basic. Respect. As Sarah walked toward Lane 7, her assigned position, she could feel the weight of skeptical gazes following her. The canvas bag remained clutched in her left hand, its contents a mystery that would soon reshape everyone's assumptions about who belonged in this world of gunpowder and precision. The target hung 30 feet away, a simple black circle on white paper. To everyone watching, it might as well have been 30 miles. They had already written the story's ending before the first shot was fired, convinced they knew exactly how this would unfold. But stories have a way of surprising even their most confident narrators, and Thunder Ridge was about to learn that appearances could be devastatingly deceptive. Sarah stood at Lane 7, the borrowed .22 caliber pistol feeling foreign in her hands. She examined it carefully, checking the safety mechanisms and familiarizing herself with the grip angle, while Mike and his friends continued their loud conversation just 3 lanes away. Their voices carried easily over the intermittent gunfire from other shooters. "Remember, both hands on the grip," Jessica called out from the observation area, her voice carrying that same patronizing tone. "And don't be afraid of the noise. It's louder than you think it'll be." Frank had positioned himself where he could observe all the active lanes, but his attention kept drifting to Lane 7. There was something about the way Sarah handled the firearm that didn't match her nervous demeanor at the front desk. Her fingers found the controls naturally, and she held the weapon with a familiarity that seemed at odds with her supposed inexperience. Sarah loaded the magazine with deliberate care, each cartridge placed with precision. The other customers had grown quiet, their curiosity piqued by the novelty of watching someone they assumed would provide entertainment through incompetence. Even the regulars at the far end of the range had paused their own shooting to observe. "Take your time, sweetie," Mike called out in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Nobody's keeping score." His friends snickered appreciatively at what they considered good-natured encouragement. Sarah adjusted her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, leaning slightly forward. She raised the pistol with both hands, her breathing settling into a steady rhythm that Frank recognized immediately. It was the breathing pattern of someone who understood that shooting was as much about mental discipline as physical skill. The first shot cracked through the air with sharp finality. The black circle on Sarah's target gained a small hole, perfectly centered in the 9 ring. Not a bullseye, but impressively close for someone's supposed first attempt. A few murmurs rippled through the observation area, but most dismissed it as beginner's luck. "Not bad for a first try," Jessica said, though her voice carried a note of surprise. "Try to relax your grip just a little bit." Sarah nodded politely but made no adjustment to her hold. She fired again. This time the bullet struck the 10 ring just millimeters from dead center. The murmuring grew louder. Frank stepped closer to the viewing window, his experienced eye studying Sarah's form with growing interest. Mike glanced over at Sarah's target and felt the first stirring of unease. 2 good shots could still be luck, but the woman's stance and breathing suggested something more deliberate was happening. He tried to refocus on his own shooting, but found himself distracted. Sarah's third shot punched through the target precisely in the center, a perfect bullseye that drew audible gasps from several observers. She lowered the pistol slightly, examining, her work with the calm assessment of someone reviewing familiar results. "Holy cow," Jake whispered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Did you see that?" The range had grown noticeably quieter. Other shooters were beginning to pause their own activities, drawn by the unusual accuracy coming from Lane 7. Sarah seemed oblivious to the attention, focused entirely on the target that hung before her like a mathematical problem waiting to be solved. Frank moved to get a better view of Sarah's technique. Her grip was textbook perfect, her sight alignment flawless, and her trigger control smooth as silk. These weren't the movements of someone learning fundamentals. They were the refined actions of someone who had spent years perfecting them. "Ma'am," Frank called out during a brief lull in the firing. "Where did you say you learned to shoot?" Sarah turned slightly, her expression mild and unchanged. "I didn't say," she replied simply, then returned her attention to the target. The fourth shot obliterated her previous bullseye, punching through the exact same hole with mechanical precision. A collective intake of breath swept through the observation area. This was no longer beginner's luck, this was demonstration of skill that bordered on the supernatural. Mike had stopped shooting entirely, his own target forgotten as he stared at the increasingly impossible scene unfolding at Lane 7. His earlier jokes about pottery classes now felt foolish and embarrassing, hanging in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Jesus, he muttered under his breath. Who is she? Jessica had abandoned her magazine, pressing her face against the observation window with the fascination of someone watching a magic trick she couldn't explain. The basic .22 caliber pistol that she'd selected as appropriate for a beginner was performing feats of accuracy that most of their regular customers couldn't achieve with their custom-modified competition firearms. Sarah's fifth shot created another, perfect bullseye, this one at a slightly different point on the target. She was now shooting with the casual precision of someone solving simple arithmetic problems, each bullet finding its mark with mathematical certainty. The range had grown almost silent except for the sharp reports of Sarah's shooting. Even the music from the overhead speakers seemed muted by the weight of collective disbelief. Frank had seen impressive shooting before, but this display was something entirely different. How many shots left in that magazine? Jake asked quietly, his voice carrying none of its earlier bravado. Mike counted quickly in his head. 5 more. Sarah's 6th shot struck center mass again, followed immediately by her 7th. Each bullet found the 10 ring with the reliability of a machine built for precision. The paper target was beginning to look like it had been attacked by a very small, very accurate drill. By the time Sarah fired her 8th shot, a crowd had gathered behind the observation window. Word was spreading through the range with the speed of wildfire. The quiet woman in Lane 7 was shooting like an Olympic champion. Her 9th shot completed a tight cluster of holes that would have impressed competitive marksmen. The 10th and final shot of the magazine punched through the center of the target with the same casual precision that had defined every round before it. Sarah set the pistol down carefully, removed her ear protection, and turned to face the stunned audience that had gathered behind her. For the first time since entering Thunder Ridge, she allowed herself a small, enigmatic smile. "I think I'd like to try something with a little more challenge," she said quietly. The silence at Thunder Ridge stretched for several heartbeats after Sarah's quiet request. Frank was the first to recover, his decades of experience helping him process what he'd just witnessed. He approached the firearms counter with the careful movements of someone who had suddenly realized he was in the presence of someone extraordinary. "What did you have in mind?" Frank asked, his voice respectful in a way that hadn't been present during Sarah's initial interaction with the staff. The patronizing tone that had characterized everyone's earlier comments had evaporated completely. Sarah considered the options displayed in the case, her eyes moving across the selection with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. Perhaps something in 9mm? Or maybe a .45 ACP if you have one available. Jessica exchanged glances with Mike, both of them recognizing that Sarah's casual mention of specific calibers suggested a familiarity that went far beyond what any of them had initially assumed. The woman who had seemed so out of place 30 minutes earlier was now discussing ammunition types with the confident vocabulary of an experienced shooter. "We have a Glock 19, Frank offered, retrieving a sleek black pistol from the case. 9mm 15-round capacity, popular, with law enforcement." He paused, studying Sarah's reaction to see if the law enforcement reference sparked any recognition. Sarah examined the Glock with practiced efficiency, checking the action and testing the trigger weight. Her movements were economical and purposeful, displaying the kind of muscle memory that only came from extensive training. The canvas bag remained at her feet, its mysterious contents still unexplored. "This will work nicely," she said, accepting a fresh target from Frank. "Could we move the distance back to 50 feet? 30 feet is a bit close for proper evaluation." The request sent another ripple of surprise through the gathered observers. Most recreational shooters struggled with accuracy at 25 feet, and Sarah was asking to double that distance as if it presented no challenge at all. Mike found himself approaching Lane 7, drawn by a curiosity that overrode his earlier embarrassment. "Ma'am, I have to ask, have you shot competitively? That was incredible shooting back there." Sarah looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience he was only beginning to appreciate. "I've had some training," she replied with characteristic understatement. Frank hung the new target at 50 feet and returned to the observation area, where a crowd of nearly 20 people had gathered. Word of the remarkable shooting demonstration had spread throughout the facility, drawing spectators from the retail area, the gunsmith shop, and even the administrative offices. Sarah loaded the Glock's magazine with the same methodical care she'd shown with the .22, each cartridge seated with precision. At 50 feet, the target's black center looked substantially smaller, presenting a challenge that would test even experienced marksmen. At this distance, the fundamentals become even more important, Frank announced to the crowd, his voice taking on the tone of an instructor. Sight alignment, breathing control, trigger discipline. Any small error gets magnified significantly. Sarah assumed her shooting stance, the Glock held in a perfect isosceles position. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that Frank had noticed earlier, but now seemed even more pronounced and deliberate. She was preparing for this shot, with the focused intensity of someone for whom precision was not just a goal, but a requirement. The first shot from the 9mm was noticeably louder than the .22 had been, the sharp crack echoing through the range with authority. Sarah's target acquired a hole in the 9 ring, slightly off-center but well within the scoring area. "Excellent shot at this distance," someone called out from the crowd. But Sarah showed no acknowledgement. She was already preparing for her second attempt. Her focus narrowed to the mathematical relationship between sight alignment, breathing, and trigger control. Her second shot struck the 10 ring with precision that drew audible appreciation from the experienced shooters in the audience. Several people began pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming an exceptional demonstration of marksmanship. "Who wants to bet she can keep this up?" Jake whispered to Mike, though his voice carried none of the mockery that had characterized his earlier comments. He was watching Sarah with the growing recognition that he was witnessing something genuinely remarkable. Sarah's third shot punched through the center of the target with mechanical precision. The fourth followed immediately into nearly the same hole, creating the tight grouping that separated expert marksmen from recreational shooters. Frank had begun taking notes on a small pad, documenting the display with the attention of someone who understood its significance. In his 4 decades at shooting ranges, he had seen perhaps a dozen shooters demonstrate this level of consistent accuracy, and most of them had been active or retired military with specialized training. "Ma'am," Frank called out during a pause, "in the firing, would you mind if I asked about your background? This is truly exceptional shooting." Sarah lowered the pistol and turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. The crowd waited in expectant silence, sensing that they might finally learn something about the mysterious woman who had wandered into their range and proceeded to redefine their understanding of what was possible. "I served in the military for a while," she said simply. "Did some specialized work." The understatement was so profound that several people actually laughed, though not with mockery. It was the laughter of recognition that comes when someone realizes they've been watching a master at work without understanding the full scope of what they were witnessing. Sarah returned her attention to the target and fired her 5th shot, creating another perfect hole in the center ring. The crowd watched in respectful silence as she continued, each subsequent shot demonstrating the same relentless accuracy that had characterized her entire performance. By the time she had emptied the 15-round magazine, Sarah's target looked like it had been systematically destroyed by a precision instrument. Every shot had found the scoring rings, with most clustering in a group that could be covered by a quarter. "Specialized work," Mike repeated quietly, shaking his head in amazement. "Lady, I think that might be the understatement of the century." The crowd at Thunder Ridge had grown to nearly 30 people, with spectators spilling out from the observation area into the main corridor. Sarah's demonstration had drawn employees from every department, including the range owner, Bill Harrison, who rarely left his office during busy afternoons. Bill approached Frank with the measured steps of someone trying to process an unusual situation. He'd built his reputation on understanding firearms and the people who use them, but the quiet woman at Lane 7 was challenging every assumption he'd developed over 20 years in the business. "Frank, who is she?" Bill asked quietly, his voice carrying the tone of someone who suspected he was missing something important. Frank shook his head slowly, still making notes on his pad. "She says she did some specialized work in the military. Bill, I've been watching people shoot for longer than I care to remember, and I've never seen anything quite like this." Sarah had reloaded the Glock and was examining her target through a small pair of binoculars that had appeared from her pocket. She studied the grouping with the analytical attention of someone evaluating technical performance rather than celebrating personal achievement. "I'd like to try something a bit more challenging," she announced, her voice carrying easily across the now silent range. "Could we set up targets at 75 feet? And perhaps something smaller than these standard bullseye targets?" The request sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. 75 feet was approaching the maximum effective range for handgun shooting, a distance where even minor errors in technique became magnified into significant misses. Bill stepped forward, his curiosity overriding his usual business caution. "Ma'am, we have some reduced-size targets designed for precision competitions, but at 75 feet with a standard pistol, they become extremely difficult. Most of our competitive shooters practice at that distance with specialized equipment." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "The competition targets should work fine." She paused, glancing down at the canvas bag that had remained beside her throughout the demonstration. "Though I should probably use something more appropriate for the distance." For the first time since entering Thunder Ridge, Sarah opened her mysterious canvas bag. The crowd pressed closer to the observation windows, their collective curiosity finally about to be satisfied. From the bag, Sarah withdrew a custom pistol case, its black polymer surface bearing the discreet markings of a high-end manufacturer. She opened it with practiced movements, revealing a pistol that immediately caught Frank's expert attention. "Is that a Wilson Combat?" Frank asked, his voice carrying the reverence that serious shooters reserve for truly exceptional firearms. Sarah lifted the pistol from its case, and even from a distance, the crowd could see that this was no ordinary handgun. The custom grips, precision barrel, and competition-grade sights marked it as a tool built for the most demanding applications. "It's been modified for my specific requirements," Sarah replied, checking the action with movements that spoke of intimate familiarity. "I've had it for quite a while." She withdrew a small wooden box from the bag, revealing hand-loaded ammunition that gleamed under the range's fluorescent lights. Each cartridge was precisely crafted, representing the kind of attention to detail that separated serious marksmen from casual shooters. Mike approached the observation window, studying the custom pistol with growing amazement. "Ma'am, that's easily a $5,000 firearm. That's competition-grade equipment." Sarah began loading the magazine with her custom ammunition, each cartridge placed with the careful attention of someone who understood that precision began with components. "Actually, it's worth considerably more than that. The modifications alone cost more than most people spend on their cars." The statement was delivered with such casual matter-of-factness that several people in the crowd exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand that they had stumbled into the presence of someone whose involvement with firearms went far beyond recreational shooting. Frank hung fresh targets at 75 feet, the reduced-size competition circles looking impossibly small from the firing line. At this distance, the black center was barely larger than a quarter, presenting a challenge that would test the limits of both equipment and skill. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bill announced to the crowd, "what we're about to witness is precision, shooting at its finest. At 75 feet with targets this small, even Olympic-level competitors consider it a significant challenge." Sarah approached the firing line with the custom pistol, her entire demeanor shifting subtly. The mild-mannered woman who had seemed so out of place earlier was transforming before their eyes into something altogether different. Her movements became more precise, her focus more intense, and her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm of someone entering a state of absolute concentration. "Just out of curiosity," Jake called out, his voice respectful but curious, "what kind of specialized military work did you do?" Sarah paused in her preparation, considering the question with the thoughtful attention she'd given to everything else that day. When she spoke, her voice carried a different quality than before, one that suggested depths of experience that went far beyond anything they had imagined. "I was a designated marksman for special operations," she said simply. "Precision shooting was my primary responsibility for 15 years. The revelation hit the crowd like a physical force. Designated marksmen were among the most elite shooters in the military, selected for their exceptional skills, and trained to standards that exceeded even regular sniper programs. Sarah wasn't just a good shot. She was one of the most highly trained precision shooters in the world. 15 years, Frank repeated quietly, his voice filled with new understanding. "And you retired recently?" Sarah nodded, raising the custom pistol toward the distant target. "6 months ago. I've been trying to decide what to do with my time." She fired her first shot at the competition target, and even at 75 feet, the impact was visible as a perfect hole appeared in the center ring. The crowd watched in respectful silence as Sarah demonstrated why the military had invested 15 years in developing her extraordinary skills. This was no longer a shooting demonstration. It was a masterclass in precision marksmanship, delivered by someone whose qualifications were written in service to country, and written in a level of skill that few people would ever witness firsthand. The atmosphere at Thunder Ridge had transformed completely. What had begun as casual curiosity about an out-of-place woman had evolved into something approaching reverence. Sarah continued her precision shooting demonstration, each shot at 75 feet, finding its mark with the mechanical consistency that defined truly elite marksmanship. Bill Harrison found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about evaluating customers. The woman he'd initially dismissed as another nervous beginner was demonstrating skills that exceeded those of his most accomplished instructors. Her custom Wilson combat pistol spoke with authority at each shot, and the distant targets accumulated perfect holes with mathematical precision. "Ma'am?" Bill approached the firing line during a pause in Sarah's shooting. "I owe you an apology. We clearly misunderstood who we were dealing with when you walked in here today." Sarah lowered her pistol and turned to face him, her expression showing neither offense nor satisfaction. "No apology necessary. I'm accustomed to people making assumptions based on appearances. It comes with the territory." Frank had been quietly documenting Sarah's performance, and his notes were becoming increasingly detailed. As someone who had trained law enforcement and competitive shooters for decades, he recognized that he was witnessing something genuinely extraordinary. 15 consecutive shots in the 10 ring at 75 feet, Frank announced to the crowd. "With a handgun, using iron sights, not optics. That's world-class precision shooting by any standard." Mike approached Sarah with the humble demeanor of someone who had learned a valuable lesson about assumptions. His earlier comments about pottery classes now seemed not just inappropriate, but almost offensively ignorant. "Ma'am, I need to apologize for my behavior earlier. I had no idea we were in the presence of someone with your qualifications. That was inexcusable." Sarah studied his face for a moment, then nodded graciously. "Your apology is accepted. We all make judgments based on limited information. The important thing is being willing to adjust those judgments when presented with new evidence." Jessica had abandoned her position at the front desk entirely, drawn by the unprecedented display unfolding. At Lane 7, her magazine lay forgotten on the counter as she watched Sarah demonstrate marksmanship skills that redefined her understanding of what was possible with a handgun. "I have to ask," Jessica said, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than the dismissive tone that had characterized their initial interaction. "Why did you choose to come here today? With your skills, you could train anywhere in the country." Sarah carefully placed her custom pistol on the shooting bench, treating it with the respect that such a precision instrument deserved. "I moved to this area 6 months ago after my retirement. I heard Thunder Ridge had a good reputation, and I wanted to find a local range where I could maintain my skills." She paused, surveying the crowd that had gathered to watch her demonstration. "I also wanted to see if there might be opportunities to share some of what I've learned over the years. Teaching precision marksmanship can be very rewarding work." Bill's eyes lit up with sudden understanding. "Are you suggesting you might be interested in working here, as an instructor?" The possibility sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. The idea that they might have regular access to training from someone of Sarah's caliber was almost too good to believe. "I've been considering it," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "I enjoy working with people who are serious about developing their skills, and I think I might have something valuable to contribute to your training programs." Frank stepped forward, his decades of experience making him acutely aware of the opportunity that was being presented. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what was your military designation? Your precision with handguns is remarkable, but I'm sensing there's more to your background than you've mentioned." Sarah's expression became thoughtful, as if she were weighing how much of her story to reveal. The crowd waited in expectant silence, sensing that they were about to learn something significant about the mysterious woman who had wandered into their range. "My official designation was Special Operations Designated Marksman," she said quietly. "But my actual responsibilities were somewhat broader than that title suggests. I provided precision fire support for counterterrorism operations across multiple theaters of operation." The revelation was delivered with such understated professionalism that it took several moments for its full significance to register with the crowd. Sarah wasn't just a former military marksman. She was a combat veteran whose skills had been tested under the most demanding conditions imaginable. 15 years of special operations," Mike said quietly, his voice filled with newfound respect. "And we almost turned you away at the door." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "I'm used to being underestimated. It's actually been an advantage in many situations throughout my career. People reveal their true intentions when they believe they're dealing with someone harmless." Bill was already envisioning the possibilities. Thunder Ridge could become known throughout the region as the place where civilians could receive training from a genuine special operations veteran. The business implications were staggering, but more importantly, it represented an opportunity to elevate the quality of firearms education they could provide. "Would you be willing to give us a demonstration of your long-range capabilities?" Bill asked hopefully. "We have rifle facilities that extend to 300 yards. Sarah's eyes brightened with interest for the first time since entering the range. "I'd enjoy that very much, though I should probably mention that my primary specialty was actually precision rifle work, not handguns. What you've seen today represents my secondary skill set." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they had witnessed. If her secondary skills included the kind of handgun precision they had just observed, the implications for her primary specialization were almost beyond comprehension. Frank began making calculations in his head, trying to imagine what kind of rifle accuracy they might be about to witness. The demonstration was far from over, and Thunder Ridge was about to discover that they had barely scratched the surface of Sarah Martinez's true capabilities. The rifle range at Thunder Ridge extended across a natural valley, with targets positioned at distances from 100 to 500 yards. Sarah's canvas bag had yielded additional surprises. A custom rifle case containing a precision-built, bolt-action rifle that immediately caught the attention of every serious shooter present. "That's a custom Remington 700, Frank observed, his voice carrying the reverence reserved for truly exceptional equipment. "Probably worth more than my car." Sarah assembled the rifle with practiced efficiency, each component fitting together with the precision of a Swiss watch. The custom stock, match-grade barrel, and precision optics represented the culmination of decades of technological advancement in long-range shooting. Bill had arranged for the crowd to observe from the covered pavilion that overlooked the rifle range, providing clear sight lines to targets at multiple distances. Word of Sarah's demonstration had spread beyond Thunder Ridge, drawing spectators from neighboring ranges and several local law enforcement agencies. "Before we begin," Sarah announced to the gathered crowd, "I should probably provide some context for what you're about to observe." She paused, checking the rifle's scope adjustments with movements that spoke of absolute familiarity. "During my military service, I held the record for confirmed long-range eliminations in 3 different operational theaters. My longest confirmed shot was at a distance of 1,147 meters, roughly 2,020 yards. The conditions were challenging, with significant wind and temperature variations." The crowd absorbed this information in stunned silence. They were in the presence of someone whose skills had been tested under the most demanding conditions imaginable, where precision meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Frank approached with a range card detailing the distances and wind conditions for the day. "Ma'am, our longest target is positioned at 500 yards, with current wind conditions from the southwest at 8 miles per hour." Sarah studied the range card with professional attention, making mental calculations that incorporated dozens of variables most recreational shooters never considered. That should provide a reasonable demonstration of basic precision shooting techniques. She assumed a prone position behind the custom rifle, adjusting the bipod and settling into the stable firing platform that serious long-range shooting required. The crowd watched in respectful silence as Sarah transformed once again, this time into the focused professional who had spent 15 years providing precision fire support for the most elite military units in the world. Her first shot at 500 yards struck the target with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Through the spotting scopes, observers could see a perfect hole in the center ring of the distant target. "Dead center at 500 yards, Frank announced, his voice carrying amazement despite his decades of experience. "First shot, cold barrel." Sarah worked the bolt with practiced efficiency, chambering a second round while making minute adjustments to her position. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that allowed for precise trigger control at extreme distances. The second shot struck within millimeters of the first, creating a grouping that would have impressed Olympic competitors. The crowd was witnessing precision shooting at a level that few people ever experienced, delivered with the casual competence of someone for whom such accuracy was simply expected performance. "Ma'am," Bill called out during a pause in the shooting, "would you be willing to share your name with us? I think people would like to know who's providing this incredible demonstration." Sarah looked up from her rifle, considering the request with the same thoughtful attention she'd given to everything else that day. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet pride that hadn't been present during her earlier understatements about her background. "My name is Sarah Martinez, Master Sergeant retired. Some of you may have heard of the designation Ghost of Baghdad. That was my operational call sign during the Iraq deployment." The revelation hit the crowd like a physical shock. Several people actually stepped backward, their faces showing the kind of recognition that comes